Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Elliot Parker, and whether you're a writer, a reader, or just a lover of words, I invite you to stop what you're doing and join me for a page break. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time visiting our channel and visiting the Page Break channel, welcome. If you stumbled upon us as you were looking for something to watch on YouTube, we're glad to have you here. If this is your first time coming across the channel, glad to see you. And if you're a returning person or you've been watching episodes in the past and maybe you've been away for a while, welcome back. And if you're a regular viewer of our channel, thanks for sticking with us as we continue to profile books, we interview authors, we talk about publishing industry news, we bring you agents, editors, publishers, acquisitions editors, everybody involved in the book production and making and writing and editing and publicizing process as part of the channel here. So no matter where you come from, if you're joining us for the first time or if you're a veteran, thanks for popping in and stopping in. I invite you to please like the channels on the subscribe buttons that you see listed here below. If you're watching us on YouTube, if you're following us on Instagram, be sure that you like this video and also leave us any comments or questions in that comments field, and also leave us any questions or comments in the YouTube comments field, and we'll be sure and address those. And let's just have a conversation about books and publishing and what we're reading and what we're writing and anything going on in the world of books and anything going on really in the world of literary arts. So the purpose of this video was to talk about and review a few books that I've read recently, and to talk about something I have done for the very first time as a book reader. For the very first time, I went to a bookstore as I had finished my last set of books, and I was looking to make another book haul. So I went and got some books, and I picked some books out by this criteria only, and that is I went and found books that I picked up and read, or picked up to read, and eventually did read, and they became read books. I eventually picked these books up based on the titles alone. So we hear this oftentimes, and you may feel this way as a reader, or if you're a writer. I know a lot of writers spend a lot of time thinking about the titles of their works and thinking about what they're going to title their manuscripts, and what they're going to title the information that they have written, or the collection of stories, or the collection of poems, or the novel. And sometimes the title that the author comes up with isn't the title that the publisher ends up using. And we've had some of our writers on the program talk about that. Well, in this case, I wanted to do that same principle and apply that same principle and do that same thing with books that I chose at the bookstore. So I went and I found a set of books that I picked up to read based only on the titles alone. I didn't pay any attention to the content. I didn't pay any attention to the genre. I didn't pay any attention to if it was a new release or an old release or had been out for a while. I just picked up books solely based on the title, not necessarily the cover, but the title. If the title grabbed my attention, I picked it up and read it. And so I read these books, and I'm going to profile 5 of them here today on this episode on the channel, and talk about how successful was this venture. Can you literally buy books off of a bookshelf at a bookstore based on titles alone, know nothing about the author, don't look at anything about the book or the plot or the information on the back jacket cover, and have a quality reading experience? So I'm excited to profile these books for you, and I'll go ahead and get started with that. And I'm so excited to share these with you because, again, I've never done anything like this before. I've never just picked up books without looking at the author, thinking about the author, if I've read that author, heard of that author, haven't heard of that author, or not looked at the back jacket cover to see an idea or get an idea of what the book's about. First time I've ever done this. So I'm excited to share some of my books with you, and some of the books that I read. These 5 were really interesting for a variety of reasons, so I'll share them with you now. The very first one I read, this was actually the very first one I picked up. This is a book by Sue Black. It is called Written in Bone. Now, who would not want to pick this book up based on the title alone? If you were at a bookstore and saw Written in Bone listed on the front of a book, wouldn't you at least want to pick it up and find out more about it? When I saw this and I saw Written in Bone, I had never heard of a title like that. I've seen book titles with bones in it, the word bones or in bones, or phraseology with bones. I've seen certainly book titles with written and writing as part of the title, but I've never seen one like this, Written in Bone. And one of the things I love so much about this book is it's written from a forensic anthropologist named Sue Black. And basically what she does in this book is she takes us all the way through the anatomical structures of the human body. So she starts at the top of your head, goes all the way down to your toes, and she talks about the different bones, the different muscles that form around those bones, and why our bones are shaped and structured to do certain things. So, for example, why is your clavicle located here in your shoulder blade and in your shoulder area? What's its purpose? Why is it shaped the way that it is? Why is it structured the way it is? Why is it so terribly painful if you've ever broken your clavicle or known of someone who's broken your clavicle? Why is that such a painful process, and why does it take so long for that bone to heal? She goes through all of that step by step, from the tip of your head down to the tips of your toes. But what's really cool about that is, as a forensic anthropologist, and she's a world-renowned forensic anthropologist, she has been used by the FBI, by law enforcement agencies, both local and state. She's done work for Interpol as a forensic anthropologist. She basically goes and studies the anatomical structures of people that are involved in violent crimes. That's what kind of her role is as forensic anthropologist. So what she also talks about in this book is how understanding the human body helped her solve cases and helped her contribute information to help police and help law enforcement officials solve homicide cases. In some cases, these homicide cases were cold cases that had been reinvestigated, and some of these cases that she helped solve were current cases. But she talks about some of her most famous cases in her career as a forensic anthropologist, and how understanding the human body helped her solve those cases. So you get sort of the anatomy, physiology explanations and descriptions in this book, but you also get a little bit of true crime. If you're a true crime aficionado, you get a little bit of that, about how she applied this knowledge and this information to help solve and help catch killers of violent crime, people who'd committed violent crime, mostly homicides against other people. It was fascinating. I have never read a book quite like this that has blended those two things together. I will note that this also was a Barnes & Noble nonfiction book pick of the month for March. So if you have a Barnes & Noble store in your area close by, if you walk in there anytime this month, you're probably going to see this book out on a display table. Don't walk past it. Pick it up. Read it. It's fantastic. And it's not written in scientific style. She does a very good job of clearly and concisely explaining what the different muscles and bones in the body do and how they work together and what they show and reveal about us as people. But the information on how she connects that knowledge to the crimes, and she explains some of the famous crimes that she solved. It's really a terrific book. I haven't read anything like this before. I absolutely loved it. My dad was a mortician. My grandfather was a mortician. My mother was a nurse. And so I had some sense of the human body based on their lines of work and kind of what they did and how they helped treat patients and take care of people after their lives were over. But I never had it quite explained the way that Sue Black does. So I would highly, highly recommend this nonfiction book called Written in Bone. And again, who would not pick up that book just based on the title alone? How cool of a title is that? Haven't seen a book quite like that with that title, Written in Bone. The second book I wanted to profile, this is another one that I picked up at my local independent bookstores. I was sort of wandering around and I found myself in the nonfiction section. And again, I picked this up just for the title alone, not knowing anything really about what it was going to be focusing on or who the author was. But I really, really liked this. It's called Unscripted. And this is a book by James B. Stewart, who was a former reporter for the New York Times and is now doing some other things since he's left the New York Times. But this book is basically about Sumner Redstone. And if you don't know who Sumner Redstone is, he used to be the president and owner of CBS and Viacom. And Sumner Redstone was a man who lived well into his 90s. He was a billionaire multi-times over by the time he died. And this is the story of what happened to him, both as he built his fortune, as he became a powerhouse, as he kind of became a media mogul, but also what happened to him after he died, and how all of these people that you see here on both sides of the cover, these are his children. 4 of them are his children. And then I think this is his attorney right here, or his power of attorney who's involved in sort of settling his estate after he died. But this is his daughter, Sharon, over here on the right. She figures prominently in the story. She has a lot of ink spilled towards her story and her explanation. Sumner Redstone was a really interesting person. He was someone who liked to date younger women. He was a womanizer. He was someone who had been married and divorced hundreds of times. He would stalk women. He would kind of threaten women to go on dates with him, in addition to his role at CBS. What's interesting that you'll learn about Sumner Redstone, though, not only is he a billionaire, and you get all sort of the fighting that goes on between the family, and that's Sumner Redstone right there, his portrait hanging in the middle of the cover. But you also learn about the backdoor dealings of media and how we got into this corporatization of our media. And I don't know if you know a lot about this. I'm interested in this because I'm a former journalist, and I, went through this as an employee quickly and got reassigned and ultimately left the profession because of corporate ownership of the media. But Sumner Redstone started that back in 2000 when he took CBS and bought Viacom. And if you remember, Viacom produced a lot of television programs, a lot of movie series. A lot of the movies, if you remember the old CBS Sunday night movies or ABC Sunday night movies they used to air back in the early to mid 90s to the late 90s. Well, Viacom, the company, oftentimes put those films together and would stream those or distribute those for the network for that programming. Well, Sumner Redstone bought Viacom and ultimately made a play on Paramount. If you know anything about Paramount Television or Paramount Kings Island or Paramount Six Flags or any of the amusement parks, eventually made a play on them as well. So Sumner Redstone was kind of the first media mogul to really start this corporatization of the media that we see now. And that's why, all of our television and radio stations are just owned by a handful of companies. Most of our newspapers, if your community still has a newspaper, it's owned by some corporation out of Virginia or Dallas, Texas, or San Francisco, somewhere like that. Same is true for a lot of our television and radio stations, unfortunately. A lot of the programming decisions that you see on your network television or on your local radio station are not even made in your community. They're made somewhere else in a corporate office. And Sumner Redstone gets a lot of credit for that. That's how he sort of amassed more and more money in his life in the early 2000s. But this was a terrific book. As you sort of go behind the scenes and learn about media and how large corporate media works and how Sumner Redstone was able to take people like Les Moonves, Harvey Weinstein, some of these guys that you've heard about in recent years make news in the media. Harvey Weinstein obviously doesn't need to be said anymore about him. Les Moonves was the president at CBS News for a long, long time. He helped create 60 Minutes and make that a brand and some other kinds of things. But it's all about Redstone, how he built that, how he kind of manipulated these people, and how he just sort of used his strong-armed personality and the manipulation of his family to amass billions and billions of dollars, and then ultimately leave it to his daughter Sharon to kind of clean up the pieces after he dies. So it's a great look at a rich and powerful family and all the infighting and backbiting that goes on with that, if you're interested in that. But if you're interested in a story about media and the corporatization of the media and how the media is the way it is today, it all started with Sumner Redstone. It started with his vision for the media. It was kind of his primary idea to have this corporatization of our media and have 4 or 5 companies own all the media in our country and amass all the advertising revenue to go to these companies and sort of distribute that out. So it's all in this book. Really, really good. I learned a lot. Again, I got to feed my inner journalism nerd here by reading this, but this is a terrific read if you're wanting to look and learn more about one of really the 20th and 21st century's big media moguls and one of the most richest and most powerful men when he died. It's a great book about that, but it also has all of the family secrets and backstabbing and betrayal that you would expect. And what a great title, Unscripted. I couldn't walk by that and not think, ooh, what's Unscripted? What is it about that title? What are we going to learn about that particular story based on that? So really enjoyed that book as well. It was a little long. I thought it could have been about 100 pages shorter. There was some fluff kind of put in there at the end that James Stewart put in there at the end that I thought could have been taken out and made the book a little bit shorter. But all in all, I think it was a really good book and I learned a lot about it. The next book that I'm going to talk about is also kind of related to the media. This is a book by Steve Krakauer. It is called Uncovered. So as I was walking through the bookstore, I was looking around and I was trying to figure out, exactly what I was going to read next. I came across this book sort of down the table from Unscripted and Uncovered. When I saw that title, I was like, oh, okay, what's going to be uncovered? What's going to be uncovered in this particular story and in this particular book? And the sort of the subheading for this book is How the Media Got Cozy with Power, Abandoned Its Principles, and Lost the People. So this was a perfect book to read after I had read Unscripted about Sumner Redstone, who started this trend of corporate media, especially in the broadcast media, to then come back and read Steve Krakauer's book, which is sort of the effects of that. The cause is we have all of our media controlled this way. Now, what's the effect of that for the public and for consumers? And Krakauer was a former journalist. He worked at CNN. He worked at NBC News, did a little bit of work at Fox News at one time, and now he works and runs a company called The Fourth Estate. And this is his book based on what he observed working at those 3 networks in terms of how reporting and news-making decisions were made and the content that you would see on a national news broadcast on a regular basis, how that was done, why it was done that way. He mentions a lot of names that you might be familiar with if you're a news junkie or you watch a lot of the news. They're all in here. who they did, what they said about this, some of the politics going on behind the scenes. But it really paints a bleak picture, I think, and it really paints a bleak picture for the future of media if we as the consumers don't start speaking up and standing up and saying, we don't want this anymore. You know, we're gonna watch something else. Or, you know, if we have a local newspaper in our community that's struggling, we're going to become subscribers. We're going to get a digital subscription, or we're going to subscribe to our local newspaper. All of that is kind of covered in here. And what Krakauer talks about is how we are kind of being taken for a ride by these large conglomerates. And because so much of our media and so much of our news is not controlled locally, I mean, you get the local stories, but so much of the decision making in terms of what's going to air first, what's going to air second, how much time are we going to devote to the weather, how much time are we going to devote to the sports every night, all of that kind of stuff is oftentimes not made locally. Those decisions come from somewhere else. And so Krakauer talks a little bit about why that's problematic and what that's doing to our understanding of the news and our ability to find out not only what's going on in our local communities, but what's going on a national and international level as well. This was a great book. This was a quick read. It's about 250, 260 pages. He writes it very much in a journalistic style, much like a journalist would write a news story. So it's easy to kind of get through it quickly, but I really liked it. And I think it was just a perfect connection and a perfect segue after reading Unscripted about Sumner Redstone, because again, the cause was Sumner Redstone kind of starting this movement to corporatization of broadcast media. And then here's Krakauer coming along and saying, well, here's kind of how this has worked out in the 23 years since Sumner Redstone started that. So I didn't plan to read it that way, but it was really, really good. And I learned a lot, and I felt like it was a perfect complement to that particular story. So the next book that I picked up as I was wandering around the bookstore, this is by a writer named Leigh Newman, who some of you may be familiar with. She's won a number of national and international writing awards. She's won several Pushcart prizes as a short story writer. She has also been a National Book Award finalist for a memoir that she wrote about living in Alaska. This is her latest book. It's called Nobody Gets Out Alive. It's a collection of stories that is centered in Alaska and the rural landscapes of Alaska. And I'll just read sort of a little bit about this just so you get a sense of it. It's set in the home state of Alaska, which is where she is from. Nobody Gets Out Alive turns a spotlight on women struggling to survive, not just grizzly bears and charging moose, but the psychological complexities of love and family. Alongside stories that are set in Anchorage, which is a city that's challenged by suburban sprawl, global warming, and opioid addiction, Newman delves into the remote, unsettled wilderness, bringing to life best friends, sisters, and single moms getting by in this raw, beautiful landscape. And so this is a book where women feature predominantly as the center of most of the stories, and you follow them, you kind of meet them early on in the first story, and a lot of these same characters pop up in other stories as well. But it's really, really interesting to find out about what women who live in this harsh landscape go through on a day-to-day basis. And I think, you know, some of our remote territories in the United States, we tend to romanticize if we don't live there. We look in Alaska and think, oh, how beautiful and pristine and white and clear rivers and clean air and all of that sort of thing. We think the same thing about Hawaii, you know, beautiful beaches and crystal clear water, and it's, 80 degrees all year long and all of that. But these are rough, harsh landscapes that people who live there endure on a day-to-day basis. And I loved how she was able to bring that to light. She does not sugarcoat at all what it's like living in Alaska, in rural Alaska, and some of the challenges that not only these women in the stories face, but that their families face. Access to health care, how far it takes them to go to the doctor, going to school, what an ordeal that is. Just going to the grocery store, how far they have to travel, and how they just don't run down to the street to the local grocery store like we do, or to Walmart or to Kroger's to get their groceries. They have to make a concerted effort to go into town, quote unquote, and get their groceries. And so there's no quick trips to the grocery store. If you forgot it, well, it might be a couple weeks before you're able to get it again. So all of that's illuminated here. I thought the prose was beautiful. I thought the collection had a really nice pace to it. I love short stories. I'm so glad they've made a comeback, and this is a terrific contribution to that. Only thing I didn't like about it, I'm not a huge fan of stories that are interconnected in terms of characters. In other words, where certain characters pop up again and again in certain stories or in all the stories, while other characters maybe only pop up every 2 or 3 stories. stories. I'm just not a big fan of that as a reader because, and this is a selfish reason on my part, is because oftentimes the characters I want to see more of don't tend to reappear that often. And sometimes the characters I don't want to see or read more about tend to resurface over and over and over again. And so that's just a personal preference for me. That doesn't take away anything about this collection of stories or doesn't take away anything from what she has done here with these women and showing how this hardscrabble life is for them. It's just a sort of a personal preference for me when I'm reading interconnected stories in terms of collections, because again, I typically want to see more of some characters and less of others, and I don't always get my way as a reader. But again, that's the writer's preference and the writer's discretion. But if you're looking for a really great collection of short stories, I would highly recommend this. And who's not going to pick this book up just based on the title? Nobody Gets Out Alive. It's like, woo, I really want to find out what that's about. And that title does play into the story collection a little bit later on as you get through it. So I won't tease you or spoil that detail, but if you're looking for a really good short story collection or you're wanting to pick up one that's really engaging and easily accessible, I would highly recommend that one. Then the next one I picked up, again, based on title alone, not paying attention to genre, not paying attention to the writer or what the plot is about. This one caught my attention and I was not disappointed at all. It is called Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, and the author of this book is Benjamin Stevenson. This is one of the most interesting books I have read in a long, long time. And it's a murder mystery, but it's also insight into family breakdowns that occur when one member of the family is incarcerated, and the impact that has both short-term and long-term on the dynamics of the family and the nucleus of the family. I'll just read you sort of quickly the back jacket blurb here. It is about a guy named Ernie Cunningham, who is a crime fiction aficionado. He's a reluctant guest at his family reunion. Family reunions aren't everyone, of course. He goes by the name Ern, E-R-N. Ern's is part of a notorious crime family, and 3 years ago, he witnessed his brother kill a man and immediately turned him into the police. Ern turned his brother into the police. Now Ern's brother is being released from prison, and the family is gathering to welcome him home. And so what happens is they find this very remote cabin in the wilderness during the wintertime. Ern's mother does, to bring the family together. And as they're there, another body is found in the snow as all of the different siblings are coming together. Ern's father has died and his mother has remarried. None of them really like the stepfather very much. He's a little younger than his mother. He's of a different ethnic and cultural background than his mother. And so the kids are instantly suspicious of what he's up to. But they find another brother, or excuse me, they find, as the brother's getting ready to be released, they find another body in the snow. And there's some connections to some of the family members in terms of who that person is in the snow, what they're up to, and the investigation kind of goes from that direction. So I would say this, if you are a fan of Knives Out, if you watched the movie Knives Out and you loved that with Benoit Blanc as the detective, and you love that story. I love that movie with Jamie Lee Curtis and Beau Bridges, and I think Christopher Plummer was in that as well. If you liked that movie, a lot of the carryover, a lot of the humor, a lot of sort of the dry humor and sarcastic wit from that film is similar in style to what Benjamin Stevenson is writing here in this particular book. If you're also a fan of Agatha Christie mysteries, if you like Agatha Christie stories, Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, all of those different kinds of stories, in terms of the way the mystery unfolds and how it's not necessarily a thriller or there's a huge body count or a lot of blood and gore as part of the murder investigation, but the investigation itself is more technical and more precise than the actual murders, which is kind of what Agatha Christie liked to do in a lot of her stories, if you're familiar with that. But anyway, if you like Agatha Christie, if you like those mysteries, if you like Knives Out, you're going to love this kind of a story because it's got that structure to it, the Agatha Christie structure and pacing, but it's got a lot of the comical dry humor that Knives Out had. And it also has that element of you have to really pay attention to everything that a character says to someone else because it always factors into what's going on in the particular story. The only thing I didn't like about this is there were moments where Ern sort of stepped out of the narrating of the story and kind of gave us his perspective. So you'd be reading, and at the end of the chapter, he would say something like, "See, I told you my mother was totally crazily in love with my stepfather, and I told you that my stepfather wasn't the most honest and upstanding person that he portrayed him to be. I'm going to tell you in the next chapter why that is." So there's moments in the story where we're kind of pulled away from that third person objective perspective, and we're kind of put inside of Ernie's head or Ern's head to get some context and background. That is a little jarring for me. I know that is becoming a style that I'm seeing more and more as I'm reading, but I don't really like it. I mean, pick a point of view and stick with it. You know, that works best for me. But if that doesn't bother you, and that's a criticism, again, that's more about me as a reader necessarily than a universal criticism. But if that style doesn't bother you, you're going to love this book. And who's not going to pick up this? Everyone in my family has killed someone. When I saw that title, I'm like, yeah, I got to read that. Absolutely. I got to find out why everybody in this person's family has killed someone. Really terrific book. Again, along the lines of Agatha Christie and Knives Out, if you're familiar with those styles and tones, I think you'll like that one as well. And then the last one ended up being a thriller as well. I didn't realize it until at the time. I've read some of Jordan Harper's work before. This is his newest book that I soon discovered everybody in the crime fiction community has been waiting on, I guess, for a couple of years when he started working on this. It's called Everybody Knows, and it is a terrific, terrific book. S.A. Cosby, if you've read any of his work, says this book is a tour de force. I would tend to agree. This is a book about a woman named May Pruitt who lives in Los Angeles. She's a black bag publicist, which means she is tasked with letting the good news out but keeping the bad news in. She works for one of LA's most powerful and sought-after criminal crisis PR firms at the center of a sprawling web of lawyers. There's PR flacks and private security firms all involved in this law firm. She calls them the Beast. So she works for the Beast, and she's sort of charged with navigating and squashing the bad news that the Beast is involved in, but promoting the good news, like a typical public relations person would do, no matter where they work. But her job is to protect the rich and powerful and the depraved by any means necessary. But everything changes when her boss is gunned down in front of his Beverly Hills hotel in a random attack. And then May takes it upon herself to investigate and finds out that the Beast, this company she's been working for, this firm with all of these different tentacles involved, these PR people and these ex-mobsters and everybody that's involved in the organization, they're not quite what they seem to be. And so this all unfolds on the mean and tough streets of Los Angeles. This reminded me a lot of Walter Mosley. If you've read Walter Mosley's Easy Rawlins series, his detective series, which is one of my favorites, and I think one of the best detective series ever created by any author. Easy Rawlins is dealing with, 1960s Los Angeles, the late 60s, mid to late 60s Los Angeles, where, crime was out of control. The police were pretty much inept. The police were on the take in a lot of ways. And the criminals kind of had ran roughshod over the city. This is kind of the same Los Angeles that May finds herself in Jordan Harper's book, Everybody Knows. So not only does she have to navigate finding out what happened to her boss and why he was gunned down unexpectedly in front of his hotel, and people are after her and trying to sort of thwart her from finding out the truth, but she's got to deal with all of these seedy people that she has known and come across over the years as her job as this black bag publicist. She's got to deal with them, but also deal with the politics and the culture of Los Angeles, which is just as seedy and just as corrupt in Harper's book as it was in any of Walter Mosley's Easy Rawlins books. And we've seen this too. Michael Connelly has done this with his Michael Bosch series. You get a sense that the LA he's portraying in that series is also not on the up and up, and Bosch ultimately has to deal with a lot of internal politics and problems with detectives and other kinds of law enforcement officers inside the department. So it's got that theme as well of a more contemporary example of Michael Connelly. If you've read a lot of his books, all that is present in Jordan Harper's book. I got into this book. I couldn't put it down. May is a great character. Her boss is gunned down. The way he's gunned down, it's pretty violent. It's pretty brutal. There's some pretty brutal, violent scenes in this book. There's some pretty brutal and violent and bloody and gory descriptions of things that you'll see in this book. If that kind of makes your stomach turn, or you don't like that kind of a raw thriller, I would say avoid this. But if that doesn't bother you, you're going to be in for a real treat here, because Jordan Harper has given us a great book. I expect this will probably be some of the crime fiction. This will get some crime fiction award nominations when we get to the end of 2024. So we get into the fall of 2024, fall of 2023, early 2024, getting ahead of myself there. I imagine the end of 2023, early 2024, we're going to see this book being nominated for a lot of crime fiction's most renowned and respected prizes. The Dagger Award, Left Coast Crime Award, the International Thriller Writers Association Awards, ITW Awards. I imagine we're going to see this book pop up frequently as one of those nominees. It's really that good. So I really, really loved it. Again, there were some violence and some pretty brutal things go on in that book that kind of made me sort of pause and kind of blink a little bit. But if you don't mind that, it's a terrific thriller, and I can understand why so many people in the crime fiction community, the S.A. Cosbys and the Michael Conleys, have been waiting 2 years for this book, because it really is terrific. So that is my breakdown of 5 of my favorite books that I picked up on my latest book haul. And again, this book haul was structured based on picking up books just on titles alone, not paying attention to release dates, genres, authors, reading the back jacket cover, anything like that. My sole purpose was to make sure that I picked up these books and read them just based on the titles alone. So it was really a great exercise. I read 8 books in total. 5 out of 8 I really enjoyed. The other 3 were just sort of so-so, mainly because they weren't genres that I read a lot in. And one of them was a book by a debut author, which sometimes those can be hit or miss depending on what the subject matter is and who the author is and all of that. But 5 out of 8 is pretty good. I would say take 5 out of 8, excuse me, in most situations and circumstances in any case. So that was my experiment. It worked out well. Have you ever done that? Have you ever just gone on a book buying binge and done something different, not picked books that you are familiar with or have heard about or written by an author that you really like? You've just gone in and just sort of picked things up off the shelf, or played sort of a game like this and said, well, I'm only going to buy books that meet these criteria. If you've done that, share that in the comments below. I'd love to hear some of the things that you guys are doing, and maybe I'll take some of those and apply those to a future book review episode here on Page Break, and try some of your methods and see if it works just as well for me. So again, if you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. Please be sure that you click the subscribe buttons and all the like buttons on both sides of the screen here. If you're watching us on YouTube or following us on Instagram, be sure you like the episode and leave us some comments there as well. We've got a lot of really great interviews and things coming up as we get into the spring and summer. We've got a lot more author interviews. We've got more publishing news that we're going to talk about. We're going to be talking to some publishers, and we're talking to some publicists, and we're going to be talking to some agents as we move through the spring and summer. We're even going to be going to a couple of book festivals and talking about what's going on at these book festivals and profiling those as well. So some really great things coming up on the channel. So I hope that you will stay tuned. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Page Break. Thanks for stopping by. Stay well, and see you again soon, I hope.